Thank you so much, Peter, for following up on the excellent systematic or theological foundation that Chase laid for us. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to come now into a time of Q&A. If you're either in the room and want to use Twitter, or most particularly if you're on live stream and you want to tweet your questions, there is the hashtag to use, C4CL, and we'll do our best to get at some of those questions asked in the gathering. The way we're going to do it is if you just like to raise your hand and ask a question, I'll briefly summarise it so we have it on tape and so the live streamers can all hear the question, and then either Pete or Chase will answer. Pete and Chase, why don't you come up here? If you want to direct your question particularly to one of them, say so. Doesn't mean the other one can't also chip in, but if you just have a general question, feel free just to make it generally, and we'll start up the back. Okay, so the question has to do with, the question is about the relationship between the two kingdoms that Chase talked about. The big common kingdom we're all part of, with the redemptive kingdom lodged within it as a circle within the larger circle. How do those two circles relate? In particular, how does that smaller redemptive kingdom circle engage with or interact with the common kingdom? Because the accusation against it is that sometimes thinking of that smaller circle can mean a disengagement or a sort of building of walls, and we just exist in our small kingdom and don't engage at all with the common kingdom. And that contrasts with another view that says it's just all one kingdom. Do you want to engage with?
Thank you. That's a great question, Chris. I appreciate it. I'll try to think about how to best begin with this. What I want to say about our participation in the common kingdom as people that belong to the redemptive kingdom is that we often are doing common tasks. So when most people work 9 to 5, or when they raise their kids in community, or a whole assortment of activities that we do, we're doing it with common humanity and often with common goods and common grace. And so many times our neighbors, even if they're not Christian, may outperform us in these duties. They might even outperform us in sort of their humanitarian efforts, if you will, because of the resources provided to them or the particular kind of natural skills that they have or whatever it may be. Now, that being said, what will be lacking is the relationship. So what is distinctively Christian in that space is that we are doing our work as unto the Lord, not unto men. And so our primary relationship and the way that we're conceiving of our work is work done in faith, that is, as we belong to Christ and are in Christ. Now, the Kuyperian position, I think, is an overreach and an overextension, although I don't think it's always at odds with the two kingdoms position. There seems to be some understanding of that within Kuyper's theology. However, what Kuyper was more keen for was actually Christian institutions to be established alongside of secular institutions so that those Christian institutions could impact the secular and advance. Often even, say, in politics and things like that, so that we could actually have a strong impact and even a transformative impact on society for the good. Now, I think this is a bit more optimistic than I'm willing to consider, and I think it actually removes the transformative work from Christ. We could say it's Christ transforming in and through us, yes, but I think something ultimate for the sort of the eschatological, that is the coming kingdom and the new creation, is something that still remains distant and something that will ultimately be transformed. As Pete's already said, this current order in this world is passing away. I'll just give you one quote that I didn't read. It says this. It says, our cultural activities, like marriage and commerce, are honorable. They have eternal consequences in that God will recognize our good deeds on the last day and give to us our due. But our cultural products themselves are not meant to endure to the world to come. They belong to the stuff of the present world. Now, contrary to what some people suggest, we are to spend time on things that do not last. And the example is that we're like the Israelites in exile. Even though they know they're going to be going home from Babylon in 70 years, they're still meant to build homes and plant gardens because life goes on. And God has actually given us some good things, even common things to share with humanity and to participate in society. And I actually think that we will have a positive impact as Christians living under the Lord, but we ought not to be naive either and think that the world will necessarily welcome that. I think we'll still face a lot of antagonism.
Okay, Pete wants to leave that one alone. Okay, other questions? Based on, James. So we are to love in deed and word. So loving other people is a matter of both how we speak and how we act. In fact, speaking is an action. It's a deed in its own sense. How much speech and how much word? How do we work out the balance there, and when are we saying too much and when are we saying not enough? Is that the import of the question? I'll give Pete first bite.
Can I be a bit cheeky and ask James if there's a question behind the question? So how much evangelism do you bring into your work? It would be one question, and that's in one sense impossible to answer, and involves wisdom, involves knowledge of your workplace and how that's going to work out. I mean, you'll certainly be praying for your colleagues. You'll be looking for your opportunities. Not to sort of make it too subjective, but it does depend on your personality. You might be the sort of person it's going to take you a while to build up that relationship so you can share the gospel with someone, or you might be the sort of person who on the first day of work has invited everyone to Christianity Explored. So I don't think I really have anything more to say than that.
I'll just jump in for a moment. I often think that we assume that faithfulness means getting to Jesus as fast as we can, right? So when you go to get water at the cooler, whatever it is, I don't know if that actually happens in offices, right? But it does happen in The Office, if anybody's a fan of the show. I've seen every season multiple times over. They go to the water cooler, but when you're at the cooler or the bubbler or whatever, the tea room, is faithfulness just, beeline to Jesus, hey, I'm Chase Jesus, I think that's actually sometimes less helpful than we may actually think. And part of the encouragement of Paul in, say, 1 Thessalonians and in 2 Thessalonians is work hard and, in fact, work quietly. Don't depend on people in society in such that anything comes as a barrier to the gospel. So you're not meant to be that kind of agitator in society necessarily. You're actually meant to kind of live peaceably so that other opportunities can come from that peaceable, good citizenship, if you will. So I think we need to trust the Lord for these opportunities, to always be on the lookout for them and take every opportunity as it comes prayerfully, asking the Lord for boldness like the apostles do in Acts 4, even when there may be opposition to us. But actually sometimes just being faithful in our work and doing good work will afford us those opportunities, whereas kind of that straight into Jesus might actually really be repulsive and put up a lot of barriers.
I can't resist adding something as well, especially to say that the person that it's an impossible question to answer in the abstract because of the person you happen to be in the cubicle next to or the person you happen to be dealing with. So in one way to give a simple answer is that the word you need to speak to that person is determined by what that person needs to hear from where they currently are to take one step forward in their understanding towards Jesus or in Jesus. So it's a much less daunting task if we think the person I'm talking to and I'm getting to know and loving and having a relationship with, what would be the next step for that person? What's a word that pushes them one step further? How about I try that word and then see what word comes after that? Excellent. Yes. Question is, what is the kind of theology that we're looking at? How does it bear upon someone who isn't able to work in the kind of way that we're talking about, who's prevented from it from some reason or other, personal or situational? What sort of wisdom would you offer?
I think a few things to say. One would be that our work does not define us. And so particularly if this is a Christian person, their identity is fundamentally in Christ. And so though it may be terribly painful and frustrating not to be able to work, ultimately, and I'm not saying it's necessarily easy to fully grasp this and internalize it, but what you'd be wanting to encourage them is, they're loved by God, the image of God. God sent his son to die for them, and they're of tremendous value. And I think, the Christian gospel underlines God's love for those that the world might say aren't really contributing much or are, weak. Those are precisely the people that, through Christian history, Christians have, in a sense, honored and elevated. And it's not quite the same, but think of, 1 Corinthians 12 and the image of the body, and Paul saying it's the ones that have the least honor that we are to honor the most. And I think there could be a parallel there.
Yeah, and within a theological framework that I tried to offer this evening, again, establishing our dignity in terms of relationship is really important. So I have a family member right now who became disabled years ago, early onset of dementia, is now bedridden, had worked in ministry for 30 years, and now feels that all of his dignity is gone. All of his purpose in life is gone. He can only stay in bed all day. Now, how do you comfort that person? Well, I can't tell him, get to work, make yourself useful. Do you know what I tell him? You are loved by God, and you have a wonderful relationship with him, and that's something to be treasured even as you lay in this bed. And even when your mind fails from the dementia that you suffer, God still loves you, and that doesn't change because of your mental capacities and abilities. But actually, his love is still set upon you. And you're still dignified in that because you are his. So there's a relational element. And my encouragement to him is, even as you lay in this bed, think about how you relate to the Lord. Think about how you relate to the people that are coming and serving you at the bedside still. And again, this extends to all sorts of things, not just disabled people. I mean, what about a stay-at-home mom who feels like, all I'm doing is looking after, grody kids all day long, right? I'm changing nappies and I'm cleaning laundry all day long. And my friends are making six figures and doing wonderful things in the world, right? That's how you feel, especially if you're on Facebook or, Instagram or whatever. That's all you see, right? But there's something honorable in that, because you're doing that work unto the Lord, in relationship with the Lord, and in love to those children, in raising them in the Lord. I mean, that is a very noble and wonderful thing that God has given us. So it's a highly relational thing, and I want to make sure that the relationship is what dignifies the work.
Cool. Yep, at the back. Okay, so question one, part one, do we work in heaven? And if so, what does that look like? And part two, how is the concept of reward, and I assume you mean heavenly reward, in some way tied to work? Work considered generally? Do you mean tied to work in heaven or the work we do now?
Like the work we do now.
Yeah. That's right. Okay. Because of time, how about you do one question each? How about that?
Do the first one?
He wants to take the first one.
Will we work in heaven? The Bible doesn't tell us specifically, but the image of heaven, and I know you're using heaven as shorthand for kind of our eternal existence. Our eternal existence will be physical. Jesus raised with a physical body. He remains a human being with a physical body. We will be physical. We will spend eternity as physical bodies. And I think our future, in some sense, mirrors the experience of Adam and Eve in the garden, and they worked. So I think it's extremely reasonable to assume that we will. I mean, if you take the language of ruling, we will rule over creation. So I think we will work, but it will not be work in the way that we experience it now.
Yeah, work was something good given to us, and it was given to us pre-fall as something that we were meant to be doing wonderfully, and I think that will extend. Now, in terms of reward, if you want to think about it sort of in layers, the kinds of things that we're doing in this life ethically will be judged. So 2 Corinthians 5 talks about judgment that's coming. And I think as we think about works, I don't want to necessarily extend works in terms of our behavior, our actions, or if you want to extend that to our attitudes or whatever else it may be. That necessarily is our work, but actually that all plays out in our work. So the kind of things, the way that we are behaving or acting or thinking or doing is actually coming out of those particular things and featuring in our work. So I think that sort of judgment will happen. People that are in particular gospel ministry, Paul is quite explicit, and I think this has been mishandled in the past, but I think it's 1 Corinthians, is it 1 Corinthians 3? Is that right, Peter? So 1 Corinthians 3 talks about particular things being burned up, but particular things remaining. And I think Paul is contrasting his ministry there with false apostles and other people that are establishing their ministry on false foundations. And what Paul's saying is the foundation of the gospel is what remains. So the work that we're doing in the work of the Lord, that is in actual, kingdom work, is something that must be founded on the gospel basically word ministry that's proclaiming and establishing people in the gospel, that remains. Anything else is going to dissolve up and be judged as sort of false.
Terrific. I think we have a question from Twitter. Yep. Does the work we do under the Great Commission, what Peter's been calling the work of the Lord, fall under the ethical category that Chase was referring to, that we live for the glory of God, in the love of God and of love of neighbour? That's the question. I might ask you to answer the question.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if there's a question behind the question. This conversation is actually very involved in terms of the culture mandate. Some people think that the culture mandate gets revisited in the Great Commission, and so the way that we bring dominion, if you will, is as we go out and make disciples of the nations. That's how we multiply and that sort of work. So they're tying in an evangelistic effort in terms of mission and that sort of purpose into the culture mandate as it comes in the new covenant. And so some people would say then that work does relate back. Can you please repeat the question once more, Mark?
Mission and exercise of love.
Yeah, so I think the Great Commission is the greatest exercise of love. So if we think about dignity of work being in terms of relationship of God and relationship to neighbor, if you're thinking about the best way you can love your neighbor, the best way you love your neighbor is to introduce them to the God of love. So how do you know love? God gave his son, 1 John 3:16, right? God is love, 1 John 4. So the way that we introduce people to love and love them best as our neighbor is introduce them to the God of love. And I think that extension in the Great Commission is that work.
Well, friends, it's 9 o'clock, and I think there probably are other questions. I certainly have one or two. I'd love to ask them about the indignity of work, and so if you, because that's a big theme of the Bible as well, that work is lousy in lots of ways, and that's a theme we haven't had time to explore much tonight. You might want to go and talk to Pete and Chase over supper for the next. I think they can hang around for a little while. We'll have that together in the Broughton Knox Centre between now and 9:30. So please do stay and join us. A couple of final things to let you know before we pray and go into it. Thanks, gents. Why don't we just thank them?